Hello and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to talk about #1 Sentai Gozyuger. I just watched the finale about 10 minutes ago, and I've really wanted to talk about this season for a while, especially because it's the final season of Sentai. So without further ado, this is my season review of #1 Sentai Gozyuger. So for my overall thoughts, this is probably the most disappointing Toku show I've ever seen, and that was with me coming in with cautious expectations. It's just because the season has so much potential to be, at the very least, a good season, and especially because it's the final season of Sentai, I thought it would be better, but it just ended up being such a letdown, especially because the characters are interesting, but they're sidelined for most of the time. There's some interesting stuff with the anniversary aspect that isn't done well at all either. Villains are pretty lame, but even some of the villains are pretty interesting too, so you have interesting aspects in like pretty much every single phase of the season, yet they're all squandered. And with one of the cast members getting fired after the entire season was already filmed and with like 75% of the season aired, but that's a whole nother can of worms I don't want to open. Again, that was revealed that was the final season, and by that point I was already completely done with the season. And then I feel like every single time this season was heading in the right direction, it just took 50 steps back. That's mostly because it relied pretty much exclusively on the dumb #1 battles as the main focus, and that completely killed all the excitement I had for the season. They were a fine novelty at the beginning, but by like episode 11 I was sick of them, and they just kept on going and going. Endgame arc was fine, but by that point it's too little too late. So easily the most disappointing season of Toku I've ever seen. I don't think it's the worst season of Sentai, but it's definitely my bottom 3, and I couldn't have been more disappointed in the season, especially because it is the final season. Now I'm going to talk about the characters, and like I said earlier, they're interesting in concept. Each of them has potential, but they're pretty much handled like the Jew Rangers or the O Rangers. They're pretty much handled as if they have nothing to work with, which they definitely do. That just sucks, because if they focused more on the characters, this season could have been a lot better, but as it is now, they're just not focused on it all, and for the most part, they just have one defining characteristic, and then that's just reinforced throughout the season instead of us learning more about them. Hueru certainly had his moments. I feel like there were some times when I can actually take him seriously and he's cool, and I like his worldview about him feeling like the #1 loser, but I don't think enough was done with it. And most of the time I just feel like he's cut from the same cloth as any other modern Red, where he's an annoying weirdo where his quirks overshadow everything else about him, and I think that sucks. Riku is mostly just a generic idol, although I feel like he did have his moments with Rei and Bouquet. I just don't really have much to say about him and found him the least memorable. Yugi is my favorite as a loyal acolyte of Tegasword, though I feel like it was mostly just used for jokes. What I like most about him is that I feel like he has the only relationship with one of the characters, which is Rikuo, that actually feels like it means something, but again, it's not brought up too much, and I feel like if more was done with it throughout the season, it would work better. Kinji is probably the best done character, as I understand his desire to want to live another life, but like the other characters, this is kind of just the only thing that's reinforced over and over again, and for the most part, he's just used for comic relief, and I don't think he's that funny. Suino is definitely the hardest of the main 5 to gauge. I think in a vacuum, she might be my least favorite, maybe better than Rikuo, but I just don't think her personality is that interesting, although she has the most interesting backstory. I just felt like it was resolved way too early, like it was done by like episode 20. But obviously, all of the problems is that her original actress was fired by her agency before episode 36 aired, so they couldn't use her anymore, and they had to recast her. And at the very least, I'm glad that they got a new actress, so they didn't just have to cut her out of every single scene like they were before that. But it's definitely worse because she's just composited into every scene and she doesn't appear at all, so I just forget she's around most of the time. Kumade is definitely the most disappointing 6th Ranger of all time. He's the only one of the main Rangers that has any direct connection to the lore, yet almost nothing is done with it. Most of the time it just feels like a complete afterthought, so much so that it makes a character like King Ranger from O Ranger feel like a main player in that season. He's barely around. I feel like the writers just forget about him most of the time. Even compared to Sakito last year, he has like no focus. He has like 3 focus episodes throughout the entire season. One of them is the second to last episode. One of them is a 2-parter with Bouquet, so he doesn't really get focus all by himself, and it's mostly just a #1 battle story. And the third one is the absolute worst episode of the season when he goes ballistic over losing his goddamn jacket, so he just sucks. And even when he is around, most of the time he's just discount Otori Tsurugi from Q Ranger, so he's probably one of my least favorite 6 Rangers just because of how much potential he squandered. Tegasword could have been a cool mentor-like figure, but he's also barely around. I honestly forget that he's even sentient, and most of the time it's just used as jokes for some reason, and that kind of has most to do with the lack of focus on the overall story, but I'll talk about that later. The villains really suck. Jun is one of the worst main villains, even though she's not really the main villain. She kind of just sits around and then just gets redeemed in the end. Bouquet is fine. She's likable, and I like when she's with Rikuo. It's a pretty wholesome subplot. But again, it's a super cliche story where obviously she finds out that he's Goju Leon and turns on him and then gets with him in the end. So she's fine, but she's not the greatest. Fire Candle is definitely my favorite villain. I actually believe his camaraderie with the rest of the Brighton, which I don't even think I feel that much camaraderie between the Gojuters themselves, so. And I do find it pretty cool that he's the final boss of the season, even if he does get redeemed in the end. Kuon is a pretty cool concept for a rogue ranger, and throughout the season he doesn't really show any chance of redemption, but he obviously is redeemed out of nowhere, like the most out of nowhere redemption I've seen in a while, and that just kind of tanks his whole character. And then Ribbon was such a weird character. She's basically just there to have a reason for Bouquet to turn on Rikuo. Like, I've never seen a general type villain get introduced and then get killed so fast like she did. The Calamity are the true main villains of Gojuger, but they're probably the biggest missed opportunity out of the whole season, because they're really interesting as they're more a force of nature more than anything. With Tegasword and creation comes destruction, and they're the destruction. And that's really cool in concept. The problem is, they're not even mentioned outside of episode 0, or maybe episode 1, until like episode 30, and throughout most of the season, they're mostly just glorified monsters of the week. They're not even around for that long. They're maybe around for like 3 or 4 episodes at the very most. Even the quote-unquote main villain, the leader of the Calamity, Lex, he's literally around for 1 episode, then gets killed by Kumade. So, in concept, they could have been the coolest villain faction in Sentai, but in execution, they're easily the worst villain faction, because they're basically just a collection of monsters of the week. Maybe if the Brighton got redeemed earlier, like around episode 33, like they were teased to be by that point, and introducing the Calamity then as the main villains for the last 15 or so episodes, they would actually work out, feel like an actual threat. But as it is now, they're just a complete letdown, and most of the villains overall in this season are just a huge waste of potential. The anniversary aspect is also an aspect of the season that's executed really bad. I came in cautious that this was going to be another Zenkaiger situation where it feels like the anniversary aspect is just a skin over the season, and that pretty much is what it is, even if there is some cool ideas, and that mostly comes down to the Universe Warriors. I think it's cool that we have alternate versions of the past heroes, kind of like AR writers from Decade. And I do like that most of them are played by past Toko actors, but only a few of them are actually played by past Sentai actors. And for the most part, the ones that show up in the show are just civilians of the week, so are only around for 1 or 2 episodes, or are basically just cannon fodder characters where they appear in a single scene and are defeated. I was hoping that more of them would be like Don Momotaro, Universe Warrior, or Ray, who was actually around as a recurring character, but those are basically the only 2. Not to mention, at the very beginning when Tai's actor came back as the Kuwagata Universe Warrior, I expected him to come back at some point in the season, probably as the final Universe Warrior, but he just gives up his ring off screen, and that's one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. They set it up and they didn't even pay it off. The final Universe Warrior ended up being Sasuke from Kakuranger, like the actual Sasuke, which kind of came out of nowhere because this is the only one that's playing his past character, and it kind of makes me think why they didn't just do this. Obviously, they had done the Kakuranger anniversary special recently, so his actor was around, so they could bring him back, but I don't know, it's a window into how the show could have been done better, I think. And I feel like the biggest problem I have with the Universe Warriors is that they have nothing to do with the suit that they're wearing. They're not a tribute to the suit, really, besides the Gao Red Universe Warrior in some ways. Most of the time, it's just, you could have any of the suits and it wouldn't really matter. And that's my biggest problem with the anniversary aspect. You could replace all of the Universe Warriors with original suits and nothing would really change. They're not even really tributing to the past seasons. It's kind of just there because fan service, most likely. There are also Gokai changes. Again, at least they still have their shield from their main suit, so it's at least different, but I was kind of done with them bringing back Gokai changes for Dawn Brothers, so this really didn't do anything other than bring me more apathy for anniversary stuff. This whole season just feels like it was designed as a standalone season, and then once they realized that Sentai isn't doing well, they just decided to make it an anniversary season. But the biggest problem with the season is definitely the structure and world building. There are basically 2 subplots running throughout the entire season. One of them is the ring battle royale, where the Gojujers have to face off against the Universe Warriors to collect their rings. And the second is the Gozyugers fighting #1 monsters in stupid #1 battles, which are basically just variety show skits. Unfortunately, the #1 battles are pretty much the main focus and hook of the season, which I feel like was a big disappointment. At the very least, it's something different, but it's different in the wrong way, in my opinion. Like I said at the very beginning, they had their novelty at the beginning, but because they're run into the ground so much and they're basically the only main focus of the show, they get old so fast and they're just so stupid, in my opinion. Especially because when there is some actual interesting story, it's usually the B plot to a #1 battle, and that's just the biggest problem with the season. And I feel like because of all the focus on the #1 battles, there isn't as much action. I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels like there's less action than usual, and that sucks because the action isn't as good as from Boom Boomger, but it's still pretty cool. And because the #1 battle is such a big focus, I just forgot that there was a battle royale going on. Add into that there's an interesting backstory with like Tegasword and like the mecha fight from the past. That is pretty much never brought up. That's maybe mentioned like once or twice throughout the entire season. Even like a big change like Yugi leaving around episode 30 or so. That's completely undone in one episode, so what's even the point of doing it? The last 10 episodes were at least decent. It's good that the show ended on a relatively high note, but by that point it was too little too late. I did like the resolution to the ring battle royale where Hoeru wins because everyone else dies. I think that's pretty interesting, but it could be seen from a mile away that Hoeru was going to win because he's red, and in the end everyone's fine. So it's a cool moment, but I don't really think it leaves a lasting impression. The aesthetics are pretty good. I've kind of flip-flopped between liking and disliking the Gozyuger suits, and I've settled on that they're pretty cool. I still think the solid black circle is kind of weird, but it's still overall pretty cool suits, especially Goju Polar. The soundtrack is still awesome. Opening theme is one of my favorites. Closing theme is also really good. Instrumental tracks are still really great, and I'm glad that even till the end, Sentai had great music at the very least. The mecha was pretty cool, all the different Tegaswords, but it's kind of lame that all the mecha are kind of the same thing, and I feel like all of the upgraded mecha, like Tegasword Akatsuki, were barely used. So in conclusion, Gozyuger isn't just a disappointing season, it's impressively disappointing, because every aspect of this season has potential, but all of it was squandered. And I feel like every single time the show was turning a corner for the better, it just went back to stupid #1 battles, and overall, that killed the entire season for me. I don't think this is my least favorite season of Sentai. I still think the filler child purgatory of Zyuranger no Ranger is worse, and at the very least, I had some sort of emotional response to this show, even if it was mostly negative. But it's just disappointing that this is the final season of Sentai, and this is the best they could give. It really sucks, but everything must come to an end, and not everything goes out on its own terms. I still had some fun with Gozyuger. There was some pretty fun episodes and again some really cool ideas, but overall it was just so disappointing, and I honestly can't think anything could be more disappointing than this season. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed the video. It's sad to see that Sentai is officially over, but I'm really excited for Gavin Infinity. I honestly haven't been excited for a Toko show this much in a while, so I hope it lives up to that. Sorry if my voice sounded a little weird, I'm a little sick, so it is what it is, but I'm hoping I'll be better later in the week so I can record my farewell to Super Sentai video. Probably adjust the camera for the first time, we'll see. And obviously once Gavin Infinity comes out, I'll make a first impressions of the premiere episode. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed. Feedback is always appreciated. Have a great day.